Welcome to Marketing Demystified, the podcast that connects the dots for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with actionable tips to transform your marketing game? You're in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jenn Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. Marketing programs can be prone to jumping right into doing. And don't get me wrong, for marketing to work, there has to be a level of implementation. But for that implementation to be effective, there has to be a strategy. And strategies informed by market research can drive even better marketing ROI. To discuss that topic, I'm joined by veteran market researcher and my friend, Brian Monschein. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Hello, Jen. How are you?
Very well, thank you. So excited to have you on the show. We tried to do this episode a little while ago and had some technical difficulties. So this is take two, and really glad to have you on today.
No, it's awesome. I'm so glad to chat again. It's been a little while, but yeah, looking forward to this.
Awesome. So let's jump right in because this is such an important topic, and I think a lot of marketers are really struggling with it. And I want to dig into the what and the why. But would you say that most marketing teams are actually using market research to inform their decisions, or not?
You know, I think there's probably a range of different levels of research that are being done out there, but I also think there are a lot of cases of gut decisions that are happening, and that's like the primary source of research. I've worked with companies, well-known brands that really don't have a research department at all whatsoever, and they needed help and realized that they're spending a lot of money on product launches, and a lot of them are failing, and they don't really understand why. So, I think there's the gut decision side of things, but also it doesn't take much to do research. So I think more and more with all the tools that are out there, companies are starting to at least dabble in research just to help inform decisions and mitigate risk.
Yeah. I mean, for those companies that aren't really investing in market research, or they don't have the teams to do it, like, why is that? Is it, a resource constraint? Is it a lack of understanding of what they're going to get out of it? Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, Jen. Cost definitely comes into play here. We know the way, companies have been over the years, especially since COVID. A lot of companies are struggling, and they're determined to put money towards marketing to build awareness, generate revenue. But, sometimes research gets overlooked. And I think, when you think of the simple cost of what it takes to do a piece of research, so let's say you want to launch a new ad, to do a simple concept test is just a matter of maybe a few $1,000s. And that could generate enough insight to make that ad so much better and save you what could be millions of dollars on the back end when you go to launch a new product or a new ad. So, cost shouldn't really be a reason anymore, given all the tools that are out there. I mean, research can be done literally overnight right now. And, you can incorporate that in your plan and learn from consumers so quickly. So why not do that and have that little bit less risk going into it versus just going completely blind and not really knowing what's going to happen?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting what you say about, like, you're trying to save a little bit of money. So then you pour a bunch of money into an ad that doesn't perform, or a product that fails on the shelf. And I think I've seen this a lot where market research companies or market researchers struggle to articulate the ROI of their research, because when you do it and it works, it's hard to say what would have happened had you not done that research. But you can see it over and over again that when it's not done properly, or you skip that step, that it doesn't perform.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many good case studies out there of companies that did the research, learned the insight, and it's not. That's the other thing too is like we have to make sure that we're defining these the right way. Like, there's definitely a difference between a fact and an insight. A
Mm.
fact is just like stating, the obvious of what it is. The insight, it's like, okay, it's that deeper level. It's that unmet need, and those are the things that you're not just going to find at the surface level. You need to dig pretty deep and have that conversation with your consumers or customers. But you're right, the ROI can be dramatic. It is a hard thing to measure. But when you start to see, things like you're, doing research versus not, and you see a difference in, product launches, for instance, and one doing much more, being much more successful than another, it does pay off. And I think, again, it doesn't have to be millions upon millions of dollars that you put towards research. It could be a very, very small investment that, brings a lot more on the back end in your overall revenue.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing I see in the industry on the B2B side is like a lot of market researchers and market research companies don't want to do that for themselves too, right? Skipping over that step because I think I definitely hear the resource constraint reason, but I also hear the like we understand we already know our customers. We work with them every
Yeah.
day. We have these relationships. We know exactly what they think and how they feel. But when you actually get on those calls and do an interview or run a quant test on messaging or something like that, like the facts that come out and the insights that result, like a lot of times it's minor tweaks, right? You're like,
It
oh,
could be, yeah, it could be little minor tweaks. It could be, you brought up a really good point. So I've worked with a lot of executives in my time, executives that are very high up in the C-suite of multi-billion dollar companies. And sometimes they think they know the right product and they know who the target is. But when you think of the demographics of the C-suite versus the typical consumer of your product, sometimes it's wildly different. And it's hard for them to really relate to this type of consumer, even though they think it's the right thing. So, to your point, having those conversations, like literally one-on-one conversations with consumers, it could be in a focus group, it could be, virtually one-on-one online, but just hearing them, hearing their struggles, hearing their pain points, the challenges they deal with on a day-to-day basis, those are going to be very different from those people that are in your executive suite. And I think that's where you could start to connect the dots a little bit. And
mm,
that I've used simple tools like that where you have executives sit in on a one-on-one conversation, and it's eye-opening because they start to understand, oh, okay, that this is a little different than what I'm used to. This is a different type of person that I'm used to conversing with. And that, starts to open up some eyes a bit, and you start to realize, all right, there's probably more we need to do here to make sure we uncover all those hidden insights that maybe we didn't know beforehand.
yeah. That's such a good point about how the C-suite or leadership or anybody making the decisions like mirrors your actual users or your consumers. I remember a conversation with Eva Tsai from Google years ago. She told me how when YouTube first launched, they any video uploaded by a left-handed person was upside down because they didn't do the research and they didn't have anybody
Interesting.
team recording their videos with their left hand. So, they had to fix that pretty quickly. But, I love those examples because you couldn't possibly have a representative audience in your company. You can do the best you can, especially at a company that size, but the research helps to bridge that gap.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's really funny about the left-handed thing. I never even thought about that, but it seems so simple, right? And on paper, it's like, oh yeah, of course you would think of that. But when you're, going all in on a new campaign launch or a product launch, sometimes you miss those really, big things that you think would be right in front of your face just because you're so focused on the details.
That's right. Yeah. So let's jump into some of the approaches, market research approaches that are most effective for informing different marketing strategies. What are some of the different tactics?
Yeah, there's so many, it's like Again, and I don't want people to feel overwhelmed that they have to do all of this, because you really don't. Like, sometimes it's just getting the foundational information to learn more about what's happening. So the way that I think of, the types of research that you could be doing that can really be most effective in informing the strategy of your marketing. So one, you got to know your target audience. So identifying who that is, understanding the demos, but also the psychographics, like what makes them tick, who they are, and how they're different across different segments. So you can make sure that you're tailoring that message to them correctly. I've worked for brands that have millions of people coming through the door on a daily basis. You can't possibly have one message to all of them. Each of them are coming for different reasons. Sometimes they may be very value focused. Sometimes they may be all about trying to be healthy with what they eat, for instance. And you have to tailor those messages to them. So doing some target audience research really helps with that. And then even deeper beyond that, things like understanding their needs and preferences. So, what are the challenges they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis? Where are the pain points when it comes to using a product or trying to make a purchase online, for instance? Again, that's a great way to find those pain points and then alleviate those in the broader strategy of what you're using. As an industry, whatever industry you're in, you got to know who your competition is, right? So analyzing the competitors, evaluating those market opportunities, and more importantly, uncovering white space. I've seen very effective and successful products get launched because they figured out an area that in the marketplace that no one was going after. And you would think it'd be a simple thing to do, but it's really not. But once you start to really understand perceptions of consumers, you can start to identify those key things like, hey, I'm looking for this and I can't find it. And there are some great examples out there. I mean, obviously, there's some big ones like how Uber and ride sharing was invented. There was a pain point with the taxi service system, and not wanting, not knowing how much you're going to pay, or not knowing if they're even going to show up. And Uber jumped on this, and look at where we're at now. So it's just like, those are just there's plenty of examples of those. When we think of messaging, so marketing, messaging, and positioning, you want to position your product or service so it differentiates itself from competition. So sometimes it could be one word, literally one word. I've seen that in marketing messaging that I've tested, that once you remove that word or change it, it changes the whole outcome of how people perceive the message. So those are some examples. There's tons more. When you think of product launches and pricing strategy and CX, there's plenty of ways to integrate research to just help you be more effective. And you can do it, again, in a way where you're not spending a lot of money, not a lot of resources, and you could do it in a very quick turnaround too.
Yeah. It's interesting as you sort of describe some of the different types of research or things you might consider. It feels like it falls very naturally into two buckets of like actual strategic research, where you're trying to proactively understand your audience, your competition, the whole landscape, and then research that's answering a question you have in the moment. Like, is this message going to perform on this ad, or is this product going to perform on the shelf? Is there like one or the other that is, maybe harder to prove the value of, or is there one that's more of a priority than the other? Like, where would you start?
Yeah, you know what? It's like, I think if I have to, think of all the different types of research, and I want to put a priority in a certain place, um, where I judge this by where I spend more of my time in research, with the different companies that I work with now as a consultant, and even when I was working in the corporate world, product marketing was a key area that I think I had to spend a good portion of my time. So product innovation, a lot of companies, they live or die by that. And launching new products to evolve and meet the needs of consumers, that's a big piece. So I think that's probably one where using product marketing to identify those consumer needs and pain points when they're developing products, that's going to be a critical area that I think a lot of companies are going to want to put their focus. I've seen too many times where executives, like I said, get excited about a product launch because they think it's a great idea, and then when it gets out there, for one reason or another, it fails. So I think using research in that fashion is really important. I mentioned CX. I think brands. I've had experiences as a consumer, which I always try to do, is always put my consumer hat on and think about how I look at different types of brands and how they market to their consumers. And I think CX is such a big one because if I have multiple touch points with a brand and certain touch points are really good and other touch points are crap, to me, it just collectively, it makes me feel less about the brand itself. So a really good example for me, like I'm a huge Marriott guy. I love Marriott, and Marriott's great. Believe me, I've been loyal to Marriott for over a dozen years, probably. And I have really good experiences in their, when I'm staying in their hotels, but sometimes the app can be a little clunky for me. And I've even written them and told them, certain things I think that could be, potential improvements for the app. Is that going to hold me back? No, because I'm very loyal to Marriott. But if there was another example of a company where I was like, kind of, using them, but not really, and I had one bad experience, sometimes I won't go back. I've had that happen to me with restaurants before too. So I think, this idea of CX, that's a great place to really integrate, different types of research. But those are a couple examples. There's definitely more, I'm sure, around brand marketing. You could think of a lot of different examples of ways where research can help a brand. But that's the beauty part of research, is that you can integrate in a lot of different areas and get a positive outcome out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I want to go back to, as you were talking about the, kind of understanding your target audience and the demographics and psychographics, like, we're talking about a lot of companies, brands that have a very wide range of, different types of consumers potentially. Is there, how do you use research, I guess, to decide, hey, maybe this particular segment isn't the consumer for us? That's actually not who we're speaking to, versus figuring out how to speak to everyone. Like, is that part of it as well?
Yeah, I think, in any type of research I do, I always try to segment out the respondents, because it's hard to have a blanket statement that works for everybody. I think there sometimes is an umbrella message that you can use
Mm-hmm.
that really, speaks to most people, but then you're going to want to have that layered in messaging, maybe some one-to-one digital marketing where you're trying to talk to them individually. And that's usually, like, if we're doing a big piece of research, like say we're going to do an attitude and usage study, which is really just like a, foundational information on, the consumers, the category, the competitors. I'll usually try to segment that out, and not just by demos, but I'll look at some psychographics too. And that could start to really identify, key areas that are different depending on which segment you are. So like I mentioned before around, food purchases. So I've done a lot of work with restaurants, and people go to restaurants for different reasons, just like we do. Again, we always have to remember that we're consumers as well. Even though we work in marketing, sometimes we have to take that marketing hat off. But for me, I go to a restaurant because I want to eat relatively healthy. Price may not be as important to me. It's more about quality. I want to make sure I get really good quality food. Others out there, they're all about spending the least amount of money as possible. They're on a very tight budget. They have young kids to feed as well. So they're going to be looking for, the most food they can get for the amount of money. Quality is not going to be as important in that. It's like, you got to know that stuff beforehand. Otherwise, you're going to have a blanket statement out there that's just going to say, hey, come to us for this type of food. And it's probably not going to resonate nearly as well as it would be if you were a little bit more focused.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. I got more questions for you.
All right.
Let's talk about, like, it's hard enough to get, kind of certain companies and businesses to invest in market research. I don't want to make these blanket statements and make it sound like I think nobody's doing research. Obviously, it's a massive industry. We know a lot of companies are doing a great job with this, but let's assume you're in a business that's needs to be doing more. You're already struggling to kind of get the resources you need to run these studies. How often should you ideally be doing this research to make sure that you're kind of staying on top of consumer needs?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's definitely one that companies should be thinking about. I really look at it. It depends on a few factors. So, you've got your industry, your market dynamics, your business goals. They can all play a role. The guidelines that I typically try to follow are really breaking research up into different buckets, and it's based on frequency. So that's how I usually start things. So if I think of research that I want to do ongoing or continuously every month or so, those are things that I'm going to kind of bucket together. So I even do this when I'm doing my budgeting exercises, is I try to break it down into like, all right, the stuff that I need ongoing that I have to have, those are going to be the things that I'm going to make sure that I'm budgeting for first. So it could be things like as simple as social media monitoring, just understanding what people are saying about your brand out there, different types of website analytics, CX feedback. There's a lot of different ways that you can gather regular feedback from your consumers. These are going to be the things that are just going to kind of just be like the keeping the lights on and having a finger on the pulse of what's happening with the people that are coming to your brand or service. Then I get into areas that are more probably like every couple of months or quarterly. So this can incorporate things like different types of product research. You're not going to do product research all the time necessarily. It may be like you have a big product launch every 4 to 6 months or every year, and you're going to be doing research at certain phases to really just help bring in more learning. It could be ad or messaging feedback. Again, it's not something where you're launching a new ad every week. So it's going to be, it's going to be pushed out for every month or every quarter. Or maybe you're doing some type of brand health monitoring. Those numbers don't move a lot over a short amount of time. So again, quarterly or every 6 months, taking a look at that just to have a good sense of what's happening with your brand health. And then there's the stuff that's further out. So, annual or even every few years could be things like, consumer segmentation is one that I've done a lot with. And segmentation is great because it helps you parse out your consumers beyond just demographics and psychographics. You really get a good understanding of what drives them, what their needs are. But that information doesn't change every year. Like we would typically do segmentations every 2-3 years, maybe sometimes even further out. So that's like the bigger expense that you don't have to do as often. It could be same thing with like industry benchmarking. Your industry and your competition, those aren't going to change overnight, right? You're going to have new entrants here and there, but overall, the dynamic of the industry isn't going to change much. So things like that, digging into focus groups on certain segments and broader segmentation and market analysis, those are further out. So that's usually how I'll look at it, try to parse it out by time, and then that'll determine how often you need to do it. And then when you have to figure out, well, I only have so much budget, go after the things that are more priority. Obviously, the things that, where you have the biggest amount of questions and most challenges, that's where you put your focus, and then, you kind of move on from there as you get more investment.
Yeah, that's all like really great advice. I need to point out that as you were talking about product innovation, you mentioned like, oh, maybe you do a big product launch every like 4 to 6 months. If we were having this conversation like 5 years ago, we would not be talking about product launches every 4 to 6 months. I think it's insane how accelerated those timelines have become.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive. That stuff used to be 2 years in the making, 18 months in the making. So,
Yeah, a lot of what I talk about, like I said, it's driven by my restaurant background. So it's like, they're launching products all the time. We typically would have a pipeline where one set of products was in conceptual phase, another set was already in taste test, another one was going into a market test, and they were all overlapping on top of each other. And it was like just constant churn because it's test and learn, just push it out, try it. And if it fails, we start with another one. Definitely, if you go to other industries, even in CPG, the timelines are much, more pushed out. But yeah, it's I think it's good. It's good that I have that background because it allowed me to test a lot of different things and go through a lot of different phases just to learn, the right tools and methodologies to use for each one.
Yeah. Well, and I think that sort of like agile test and learn approach, like maybe restaurant was ahead of the curve on that because a lot of big CPGs are trying to do that now. And they are really accelerating those timelines and they're doing, in market testing in 4 months. They're getting actual MVP products on the shelf
Yeah,
rather than, waiting until they get it exactly perfect, which is just, I mean, it's exciting to see. I'm sure it's stressful for the people that are actually doing it. But
absolutely.
it's an interesting, journey to watch these industries sort of change. But um, I'm really interested in this sort of like ongoing, always on, and maybe that sort of feeds into the test and learn as well. Because at the start of this conversation, we were talking about making decisions on gut feel, right?
Mm.
And I think when you mention now, like, well, how do you prioritize your budget? What are the things you have the most questions about? What are the things that maybe are the highest risk for if they fail? Then if you're doing this sort of like always social listening, CX work, always kind of trying to keep a pulse on what your consumers are thinking and feeling and doing, your gut decisions are probably going to be better.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Even the smallest bit of information will help you. Yeah. That's why I'm saying it doesn't take much. There are tools out there you could spend hundreds of dollars and have an ongoing read of what's happening out there. Is it going to answer all your questions? Absolutely not. But it's going to make you a little bit smarter.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Now, what would you say? Like, obviously, it's going to be a totally different experience doing research if you are at a big company with a big insights team and a lot of process and resource versus if you are a lone marketer or even smaller companies like startups that don't even have a marketing department yet. What do you say to the non-researcher who wants to incorporate market research into their strategy? Like, where would you recommend they start?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm lucky enough to have worked on both sides of that,
Mm,
where I worked for massive companies that had very large budgets. So a good example, I came from a company in my corporate world, in my corporate time, in my career, where the market research budget was larger than for other companies that I work with, where their marketing budget was
mhm,
smaller than that. So it's like when you think about that, like that's amazing. So I've had situations where I have plenty of money to do all different types of research, and I have situations where there's literally almost zero money, and you have to get very creative. So what I usually like to say is, especially for those companies that are just new to this and new to bringing research into the fold and what to do, I like to start with the basics. So usually, what I'll do when I work with a company that wants to start bringing in some type of research is we'll start with, okay, well, what do you have? Because you probably have more than you think. So maybe it was a study that was done by your ad agency 3 years ago, and there was a piece of research as part of that. Okay, let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at any free information that's out there, any free syndicated information, just to understand the category and the competition better. But start with the basics. It doesn't have to cost a lot. And a lot of what I do is I help companies build out sustainable research toolkits, and we do it in a way where it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. So, for instance, companies that I work with, they have relationships with third-party vendors. So, for instance, the restaurants that I work with, they also work with third-party vendors that provide them with all their food, all the different ingredients that they're using in their restaurants. A lot of those third-party vendors already have some type of research that they're collecting. It could be like some syndicated information that's gives you information on the category or competition. It's free. Take it. Let's take it. Let's grab that. Let's get any information we can from them in terms of what they're purchasing already, and let's learn from that. And then I would say, start to engage with your audience. That doesn't have to cost anything. Like in the restaurant space, I used to just go into a restaurant and sit there for an afternoon and watch people. And then maybe after somebody had made their purchase, just have a quick conversation with them. You'd be amazed at what you learn from that, because a lot of times you get so caught up in, you're in headquarters and you're just focused on the big picture stuff that you got to get done, that sometimes if you just sit back and have a conversation, it could be in a grocery store, wherever your consumers interact, but have that conversation with them. Like we've done intercepts where we talked to guests in restaurants, and we had a collection of different headquarter team members from the brand going to different restaurants throughout the day. It cost virtually nothing. We used a free online platform to do this survey work. We had consumers scan a QR code, and we had team members there talking to them after the fact. So virtually no investment. We had a nationally representative, feedback from consumers on some new product launches that we were testing. So it's like that right there is a perfect example of a way where you don't have to spend a lot of money. But like I said before, I would concentrate on, one or two critical areas where the insights are most needed, rather than trying to boil the ocean, because, you're going to want to put your focus on the areas that are going to, provide the most ROI on the back end. And then, use your time wisely when you're interpreting the data. I've seen too many times where marketers would come to me and be like, "Hey, I know what I want to do. I know a product I want to launch. I just need the research to validate it." I'm like, "Nope, I want nothing to do with that. That's not me. That's not why we do research. We do research to be open to finding new insights. And you have to interpret the data with an open mind and free of bias and subjectivity. You have to make sure that you're going into this and you're willing to hear news that maybe you don't want to hear. But there's a reason we're doing that. So, interpretation of that data is important. And then, lastly, I would say, if you're at that point where you need help, hey, give me a call. This is what I do. It's like that. I've been doing this for a long time, and, helping companies build out sustainable research toolkits. This is what I do. This is what I do for companies that don't really have a research background or a team, but they do want to start learning more. And that's typically where I'll step in. I'll learn the foundational information that they already have, and then together we'll partner, and we'll find the right partners for them from a research standpoint, and give them something that's sustainable and ongoing, that honestly, like an analyst on a marketing team could manage over time. So it's really not that difficult. And I think the payback is pretty dramatic in the long run.
Yeah. I love how you kind of simplified some of the ways to get, it doesn't have to be that every 3-year massive segmentation that's very complex, and, just go talk to people.
That's it. Yeah. Just go talk to people. I mean, look, we do this too, right? I mean, you have conversations with your customers all the time, and I do the same thing. It's like, sometimes it's just a half-hour conversation with somebody. And if you ask the questions the right way, you'll be surprised at what you hear. Like, I always try to craft my questions for them to talk to me about experiences they've had either with my service or my products. You can do the same thing as an owner of a brand. Have them tell you the last time I went to your restaurant, for instance, and the experiences you had, and take them through, all the touch points that you had with people that work there. You could do that with just about anything. And when asked the right way, it's amazing what you hear. And you're not spending any money. It's just a little bit of your time. And yes, that can be a lot of money in the long run in terms of your time, but when you're learning from your own customers, that's absolutely going to pay back.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think that like openness to hearing, like ask the questions in the right way. So you're going to not lead somebody into telling you what you want
right
to hear. And I think actually that, like we were talking in the beginning about what holds people back from research, I actually do think finding out something unexpected does sometimes hold people back from doing research. It's like, we just did all this work to develop XYZ, whatever it is, positioning, a product, I really don't want anybody messing with that. I don't
It's the
want
baby, right? Yeah,
Right.
I get it. I
Yeah.
get it. I've sat in the back of focus group facilities behind the two-way mirror and watched representatives from the brand team or the ad agency team, and they're just like chewing their nails down to the nub because they're like so nervous that they're going to hear one bad thing about the ad. But it's like, look, you got to take the information collectively. We can't just put, all of it onto what one person says. But if you start to hear it, group after group after group, okay, you know what? We have a problem. And I'm so glad we did the research beforehand, because if we launched this thing, this would have been, exponentially worse than what it is now. So, yeah, I think you need to go in with an open mind, and you can't just, put all your dollars on one statement that you heard, both positive or negative. We take a collective look at what's happening, and then, you kind of go from there.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you mentioned this concept of a sustainable research toolkit, which I haven't heard before. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. So in conversations with a lot of companies that I've had, there's always the discussion about, yeah, we wish we did research, but we don't have the time or the money for it. And we don't really know where to start. So we're not doing anything. So what I'll typically do is I'll go in, and it's not as if I'm actually doing the research with my own tools. I want this to be sustainable, where they have a relationship built with other companies in the research space for whatever needs they may have, so that when I'm gone as a consultant, I won't be there permanently. So when I'm gone, after I've set this up, they can continue to sustain this and run this. So we do it in a way where I'll find the right company fit for them, based on what their needs are. I've got plenty of connections in the industry, but also if there are companies that they like too, we can do that as well. I'll go through the process of doing an RFP and talking to a few different vendors to make sure that we've got the right partnership in place. I'll set everything up for you. I'll teach you how to use the tools. And then we'll go through a few projects just to make sure that it's very clear on what you need to do to start and finish a project. And then we get it in a place where it's pretty much like a cycle. And I've done that before with things like product testing, where there's a concept testing phase, there's some sensory taste testing work, and then there's some market testing. And, I've gone in and I've set up the tools and the process for them. I've taught them how to use it, and, give them all the documentation on the back end so they can always refer back to that. And then I'll move on to the next company. And that's usually how I like to do it, because it allows them to not have to rely on one person for a long period of time. And then if they, run out of money or want to put investment somewhere else, they stop doing research. That's the last thing I want to do. If anything, I want to have as many companies out there as possible doing research. And this is the way that I've developed it, where it's a toolkit that once they know how to use it, it's actually pretty easy to continue ongoing as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. It sounds like a concept that companies, even if they have their own internal procurement teams or whatever that are doing this work, like I think I've seen people trying to move in this direction, but like having that really tight toolkit that is repeatable and is something that you can go to over and over again. So many companies are using 10 different vendors for the same thing, or, and it just becomes inconsistent, probably costs them more money, like getting narrowed down to this, just what you need kind of resource toolkit, as you mentioned, is just a great approach that a lot of companies should be looking at doing if they aren't already.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned like some companies that they have so many different vendors that they're working with. Yeah, I know in my mind, I always like to try to have as few research agencies that I work with as possible. If I've got one that I've got a really good customer service model with them. They're attentive, they're getting the work done on time, they have a good pricing model. I want to do as much work with them as possible. And the nice thing about a lot of vendors that are out there right now is they're expanding what they can do through AI and all the other tools that are out there, DIY platforms. A lot of the vendors out there can do multiple things. So you can find one and you can do your concept testing, marketing, messaging, product testing all through them. And that is a huge advantage. One, for the agency, obviously they're getting revenue for that, but from a client standpoint, obviously, not having to have multiple people talking to, it just makes that process so much easier when you try to setting up something that's going to be sustainable ongoing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned AI. A lot of companies are being tasked with go see how we can use AI, right? Like, how are you vetting that sort of thing?
Oh,
Like, it's tough
yeah,
right now, right?
it's tough. And I'll tell you what, I do a lot of capabilities calls with different companies out there to kind of hear what they're doing, get a sense of what they bring to the table. I In every single call I have, I always ask, "What's your point of differentiation? Tell me why you're different than the other competitor that's doing a very similar thing." And I listen very intently to the answer to that, because that's going to probably determine whether or not I want to work with you. If you can be very focused on what you do and show me a true sense of why you're better, or there's an advantage, okay, then I want to hear more about that. But every one of them is using AI in some way.
Mhm.
They're infusing it in um, things as simple as open ends, and really just trying to get through open ends and create themes very quickly versus having to do that manually, all the way up to now. The big thing is synthetic panels, and synthetic data, which, they're basically creating panels of people who don't even exist. And it, in some ways, I think it's good and it can work,
Mhm.
but I think there has to be some safeguards in place. Like, I've seen companies that are starting with actual human beings, a collection of human beings, thousands of them, and then trying to mimic those people through AI to create a synthetic panel. So it's started as humans, and then it works its way into being something more synthetic. I also think that if you're using synthetic data, I do feel like there has to be some form of validation on the back end with actual human beings, just to make sure it's right.
Mhm.
But that's where the industry is going. I mean, like it or not, I think you have to get on board, because it's going there. It's going to create a ton of efficiencies for companies, and companies are going to jump all over it. But I think it could also be the wild, wild west. So I think we just have to be careful with how data and research is being used, and make sure that we're still, you know, we're still infusing that human element into all of this, because if we get too far away from that, we're gonna be in a rough place.
Yeah, for sure. That is a rabbit hole that I wish we had more time to go
That's a
down.
whole other podcast.
It really is. I mean, there's so much to talk about when it comes to AI and synthetic data and data quality and in first party data. So it is an interesting time, and I am watching closely. And before we wrap up, I want to ask one more question about I think we've gotten better as an industry, as researchers, but in the last few years, maybe 5 years or so, there's been a lot of fear around putting market research tools or methodologies into the hands of marketers or innovation folks. What's your perspective on that as a researcher and as somebody who's working with all of these different types of teams? Like, what's the right approach when thinking about God forbid a marketer do their own research?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one that I've talked about a lot. This idea of democratization of research. I think ultimately it is a good thing, if done the right way. Uh, you know, in the past, yeah, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was always that research department that owned everything. And if anybody in marketing or operations or product team wanted information, they had to come directly to the insights team. But just think of how much more you can do and how much smarter you can be if you've got some other teams giving them access to data. So it's not to say that the marketing team who has little research knowledge would be running these insanely comprehensive conjoint tests or segmentations or something like that. But there are a lot of tools out there, especially DIY, where you can go out and do research pretty easily, and there's enough guidelines and tutorials behind it where you can't really mess it up, I guess, is what I'm saying. I think
Mhm.
those are perfect examples of ways to get information out there to other teams, and start collecting information. If anything, I want marketing teams and R&D and product teams and operations teams learning as much as possible from our consumers. And if it could be us that provides the tools from an insight standpoint, teaches them how to use it, and they're out there doing it themselves, I think it's good. I think you still have to have really good communication between teams, but in the long run, it just allows you to do so much more and learn so much more to just make sure that, again, you're getting that ROI back and you're mitigating risk for any type of marketing you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think you're right. That communication and collaboration is really important. But at the end of the day, like anybody who's interested in getting closer to the consumer, like don't discourage them from doing
I don't want to stop them from that. No.
Exactly. It just like helps to foster that consumer centric culture and, you know, get everybody engaged with the research and with the insights, even if, you know, there are limitations in what somebody is capable of doing. And
100%.
yeah.
Yep.
Thank you so much for coming on today. It's always fun to chit chat with you about this stuff. And I love hearing about the work you're doing today. It's so important, and, you know, just getting more research happening for all these brands, B2B, B2C, whoever you might be. So thanks for sharing some of your tips with us today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me on, Jen. Appreciate it.
You got it. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. We'll be back with another episode next week. We'll see you then.